Lily Anderson, 24, a recent New York University art major. Life as a fresh graduate is full of challenges, but my story is not just about finding my footing in the adult world, but also about a journey that contains a family legacy, overcoming loss, and finding strength from the legacy my mother left behind. My mother, Grace Anderson, is a talented and strong woman. As a talented chef and owner of the famous Willow Leaf in Brooklyn, she is not only the person behind the perfect cakes, but also the strategic planner, always looking to the future. She once told me, "Lily, this leaf is not just a job, it is our home, a place that holds our family values." Since discovering that she had cancer, my mother has not stopped working, both fighting the disease and preparing for my future. My mother spent a lot of time teaching me how to manage the talisman, from dealing with the staff care provider. During the evenings together in the leaves, she would show me every little detail, emphasizing, "You have to know every corner of this job. That's how I keep you safe later." When my mother passed away 4 years ago, just a few weeks before I started college, my world seemed to stand still. She was not only my nurturer but also my greatest resource, the one who made me believe that I could conquer everything. Her passing left a void in my heart. The first days after her death, I was immersed in grief, and felt like I couldn't go on living. In her will, my mother left me the house and the leaves, as a final message that I would always have a place to belong. She once said, "This house and leaves are places you can always return to, no matter where life takes you." It was not only material wealth, but also the love and devotion that my mother gave me. However, my family life was not always beautiful. My father, John Anderson, left the family when I was 10 years old, to pursue a new life with another woman, Karen. After the marriage, my father married Karen, who was much younger than him, and they had a daughter named Ella, 12 years younger than me. Although my father still provided financial support for me, our relationship was only transactional. I invited him to visit my father's new family, but I always felt like an outsider. Karen was always polite but distant, while Ella, my half-sister, was raised by my mother and became the center of attention. When I visited, Karen often asked, "Lily, would you like to stay for dinner?" but in a tone that made me feel like she hoped I would refuse. Despite this, Dad always maintained the appearance of a responsible man. He paid my entire college tuition as a way to make up for his shortcomings. I accepted it, thinking that perhaps this was the only way he could show his love for me. But I never expected that my mother, with all her careful preparations, and my father with his hidden plans, would create a storm that I had never seen coming. Losing my mother was the greatest pain I have ever experienced, but she had prepared everything to help me stand firm. The bakery and the house were not just material things. They were her legacy, her heart that she left me, the lessons she taught, the loving messages that still resonate every day of my life. But I also could not have expected that what my mother left behind was not only a source of motivation, but also the seed of conflicts and betrayals from her own family members. My mother's legacy was not just a bakery or a house. It was the love, resilience, and values that she had cultivated throughout her life. I knew that protecting that legacy would be a challenge, but I also knew that, thanks to my mother, I had the strength to overcome it all. Losing my mother was the greatest pain of my life. But it was also during that time that my father, John Anderson, unexpectedly entered my life in a way I did not expect. After years of separation, and a relationship that was only social, he appeared with his new wife Karen, and their daughter Ella, in the early days of my loss. I don't remember exactly how I felt when I saw them standing in my mother's house, a place I had always thought belonged to just the two of us. My father put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Lily, we're here to help you. We're going to get through this together." Although his words seemed sincere, I couldn't help but feel lost. Karen, her usual gentle self, helped with the meals, cleaning, and legal paperwork after Mum's death. Meanwhile, my 12-year-old sister, Ella, would wander around the house, searching every nook and cranny as if exploring a strange place. At first, their presence was a comfort in the pain. Although my relationship with Dad was not very close, I was too tired and miserable to question their true motives. Karen prepared the meals and was attentive, while Dad helped me with the complicated paperwork surrounding the inheritance of the house and bakery. Ella sat with me, talking about her friends at school and her drawings, trying to make me smile. For the first time in years, I felt like a family. But gradually, small changes in Mum's house began to appear, bringing with them an uncomfortable feeling that I couldn't ignore. One day I noticed that the curtains my mother had chosen had been replaced with new, more modern ones. In the kitchen, her favorite teacup had been replaced with new utensils. I told myself that none of this mattered, that it was just Karen trying to make things comfortable. But deep down, I knew that their presence was diminishing the traces of my mother in this house. As the summer ended and I prepared to leave for New York University, Dad made a suggestion. "Lily, while you go to school, let us stay here and take care of the house. That way you don't have to worry about bills or the house falling apart." Karen added in a gentle tone, "We'll keep everything exactly as your mother left it." I agreed, thinking it was the most reasonable solution. But I didn't expect that this decision would lead to deep conflicts later on. During my 4 years in college, I occasionally returned home for breaks. During those visits, I began to notice a change in the behavior of Dad and Karen. They were no longer just living in Mum's house, but acting as if they owned it. I told myself that I should be grateful for their care, but part of me couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Looking back, I understand that this period of time was the beginning of conflicts and feelings of betrayal. My father had promised to protect my mother's legacy, but it seemed he had let it serve his new life, and that was just the beginning of the even greater stresses that awaited me when I returned after graduation. After 4 years of studying at New York University, I, Lily Anderson, was eager to return to my mother's house in Brooklyn, hoping to start a new chapter in my life. I had just graduated with an art degree and had landed a job at a local design firm. The thought of returning to the house that held my mother's memories brought me a sense of peace after the hustle and bustle of school. That day, a sunny June afternoon, I stepped out of the taxi in front of my mother's house with a smile on my face. The front garden, though carefully tended, seemed a little different. The rose bushes my mother had loved had been replaced by a different type of flower. The windows had new curtains, and the paint on the shutters had been changed to a more neutral color. Still, these small changes did not diminish the warmth I felt as I stood in front of my house. I dragged my suitcase to the door, full of anticipation. But as I inserted the key into the lock, I realized something was wrong. My key would not open the door. I tried again, but it was no success. The feeling of confusion quickly turned to annoyance. No one had told me that the lock had been changed. Knocking harder, I waited for someone to open the door. My stepmother Madison appeared behind the door. She was wearing a flowered apron, and her expression was a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Lily," she said, her voice soft but not without reluctance. "Why are you here?" I felt uncomfortable at the question. "I'm going home," I answered, stepping inside without waiting for her permission. I noticed that the living room had changed significantly. My mother's old furniture seemed to have been replaced with new furniture. The walls were lined with abstract paintings that were nothing like my mother's taste. Before Madison could say anything more, my father, John, emerged from the living room, his face pale at the sight of me. Abigail, my half-sister, loomed behind him, her eyes anxious. "Lily," my father said, his voice strained. "We need to talk. Come into the study." I followed him into the study, which still held my mother's books and papers, but the air in the room was suffocatingly heavy. After closing the door, my father stood across from me, his hands shaking slightly. "Lily, there's something I need to explain," he began, his voice low. I looked at him, a sense of unease rising. "What's going on, Dad?" Madison thinks this house belongs to me," he confessed, his eyes avoiding mine. "I told her that I gave this house to your mother after the divorce, and when she died, it came back to me." His words were like a punch to the heart. "You lied," I blurted out, my voice choked with anger. "You know very well that she left this house to you. It was her legacy." My father lowered his head, his voice soft. "At that time I thought it was only temporary. We needed a place to live, and you were away at school. And now you let her think this is her house? You let her change everything your mother left behind?" I shouted angrily, tears welling up in my eyes. When Madison knocked on the door, her voice cutting through the conversation, I knew that the relationship in my family had changed forever. The next few days in the house were filled with tension. the suffocating lies and feelings of betrayal creating an uncomfortable atmosphere. But little did I know that what I had just discovered was only the beginning of an inevitable confrontation. The first days back at my mother's house, I, Lily Anderson, was filled with feelings of discomfort and disappointment. After a tense conversation with my father, I realized that the house my mother had left me was no longer the peaceful haven I had thought it would be. Instead, it had become a battlefield of lies and betrayal. My father promised to take care of the situation with Madison, my stepmother, but the following days saw a completely different turn. Madison, who had already shown discomfort with my presence, began to openly show hostility. She no longer maintained her usual polite demeanor. Instead, her words were laced with insults, making me feel like an intruder in my own home. "I just rearranged the kitchen to make it more convenient," Madison said one day, gesturing toward the reorganized cabinets. "You probably wouldn't notice, because you haven't been here long enough to understand." Her seemingly harmless words were laced with coldness and mockery. Madison didn't stop with words, but she began to take actions that asserted her control over the house. One morning, I discovered my favorite shirt stained pink after washing it. "Oh, I mixed up the laundry baskets," she explained, her tone feigning apologetic, but her eyes full of intent. My half-sister, Abigail, also gradually changed her attitude. From a girl who had been eager to show me her drawings, she now avoided me and made sarcastic comments. "Mum says it's weird that you're still here," I heard her whisper on a phone call with a friend. The words stabbed me, reminding me that my presence in this house was not welcome. It all came to a head one evening when I walked into the kitchen to make a cup of coffee. Madison stood there, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Lily, have you thought about moving out?" she asked, her voice sweet but teasing. "You've graduated, you have a job, you're an adult, and this isn't the right place for you anymore." I tried to stay calm. "Dad said you could stay," I replied, my voice strained to keep even. Madison smiled faintly, then walked away. But I knew it wasn't the end. The tension was building. I realized that Dad was no longer the protector he once was. He avoided conversation, leaving early and returning late, leaving me alone to face Madison and Abigail's hostility. Family dinners became silent confrontations, with Madison constantly making it clear that I no longer belonged. I began to wonder if I should give up, but every time I looked at my mother's belongings, her favorite chair, old family photos, I felt a surge of strength. This was my home, my mother's legacy, and I couldn't let Madison and Dad take it away so easily. I knew that sooner or later the truth would have to be faced, and this time I wouldn't back down. The anger and determination burned inside me, preparing me for a confrontation that I knew would determine the future of the house. And me. I, Lily Anderson, knew that the suffocating atmosphere in my mother's house could no longer be tolerated. After days of pressure and hostility from Madison, my stepmother, I decided it was time to face the truth and take back control of my mother's legacy. It all came to a head one Saturday morning. The house was eerily quiet. No sounds of Madison baking in the kitchen, no music coming from Abigail's room, and no sign of Dad's car in the yard. Confused, I checked my phone but found no messages or notes. When I called Dad, he didn't answer. I tried Madison, and she finally picked up after a few rings. "We're in the Maldives," she said, her tone cold and mocking. "We didn't want to warn you because we didn't think you needed to know." I froze, not believing what I had just heard. Madison continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "When we get back, Lily, you better pack up. You have no place here. This is our house, not yours." Her words felt like a slap in the face, but instead of feeling hurt or helpless, I felt anger rising inside me. This was my mother's house, the legacy she had worked so hard to leave for me. Madison had no right to kick me out, much less claim this house as her own. That same day, I took action. I began packing away their belongings. Madison's clothes, Abigail's books, and anything that didn't belong to my mother. They were neatly packed into boxes and placed in the garage. Each item was removed like a weight lifted from my chest. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as every trace of them disappeared. That evening, I called a locksmith to replace all the locks in the house. When the repairman handed me my new set of keys, I took them with a feeling of having reclaimed a part of myself. This was my house, and I was not going to let anyone else control it. A few days later, they returned. Madison, my father, and Abigail stood at the door, angry as they realized they could not enter. Madison pounded on the door, shouting, "Lily, you have no right to do this. This is our house." I opened the door and calmly walked out. "No, Madison," I said, my voice firm. "This is not your house, this is my house. My mother left it to me, and I will not allow you or anyone else to take it." Madison turned to my father, trying to gain support, but he just bowed his head, mumbling an admission of the truth. "She's right, Madison. This is Lily's house." Madison screamed in despair, but I didn't care. I told them to take their things from the garage and leave. The anger and pain on their faces no longer deterred me. I knew I had done the right thing, not only to protect my mother's legacy, but also to regain control of my life. As they left, I closed the door and breathed a sigh of relief. The house was now mine, completely. I would do everything I could to protect and preserve what my mother had left, not only for me but also as a tribute to her love and sacrifice. After Madison, my father, and Abigail left my mother's house, I, Lily Anderson, finally felt the peace I had longed for. The tension and lies were gone, leaving a quiet space, as if the house had breathed a sigh of relief. However, the quiet didn't last long. I knew that to preserve my mother's legacy, I had to do more than protect the house from squatters. In the first days after they left, I spent time organizing the house. I started by cleaning and bringing back my mother's mementos. Family photos were hung on the walls, and old but familiar decorations were put back in their rightful places. I also decided to replant the rose bushes my mother loved in the front garden. As I watched the flowers bloom, I felt like a part of my mother was still present, enveloping me in love and memories. In addition to renovating the house, I returned to my mother's bakery, her most important legacy. The bakery had been closed since my mother passed away, but I was determined to get it back in business. Every time I walked into the shop, the smell of flour and baked goods still reminded me of the days when my mother and I worked together in the kitchen. I spent weeks planning the renovation, from fixing the equipment to rearranging the bakery counter. The bakery reopened one full morning. I will never forget the thrill of seeing the first line of people coming in to buy pastries, their eyes filled with excitement at seeing their familiar bakery revived. An older customer came up to me, grabbed my hand and said, "Your mother would be so proud." Those words brought tears to my eyes, reminding me that restoring the bakery was not just about me, but also about honoring my mother and her love for the community. While the bakery became the center of my new life, I focused on my work at the design firm. My co-workers became close friends, helping me balance my work and personal life. Harper, a colleague on my team, often invited me to lunch, sharing funny stories and discussing creative ideas. These connections helped me feel that I was no longer alone, that I was building a new life on solid ground. It wasn't always easy though. My father tried to reach out several times, leaving notes full of remorse and a desire to make amends. But I knew that apologies wouldn't change the fact that he had let Madison take over my space and destroy my mother's legacy. I chose not to respond, because I understood that to truly move forward, I had to cut the toxic relationships that had hurt me. Through it all, I learnt that rebuilding wasn't just about restoring what was lost, but about creating a new life, where I could stand on my own 2 feet, with pride. My mother's house was now not just a place of memories, but also a symbol of the strength and love she had passed on to me. One evening, as I looked out at the garden with roses blooming in the sunset, I felt a surge of hope. I know that I have overcome pain and challenges to become a stronger version of myself. My mother's legacy is not just a house or a bakery, but a lesson in resilience and the ability to rise from hardship. And from here, I am ready to move forward, carrying the love and values that my mother left behind, to create a brighter future for myself. Lily's story reminds us of the power of resilience and determination in protecting our self-worth and family legacy. When faced with loss, betrayal, and challenges, we need to learn to stand up, take control of our lives, and keep faith in ourselves. Rebuilding requires not only courage but also the ability to let go of toxic relationships, seek support from the community, and cherish the precious values from the past. Stay strong, and move forward to a better future. Share your thoughts on this story. What did you learn and what message would you like to send? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the meaningful and inspiring stories about family life that we will continue to bring.